Time now for the week that was. Let's take a look at the top stories that made headlines across the globe this week. President Bola Tinubu has ordered the suspension of all programs administered by the National Social Investment Program Agency. According to Segun Imohensien, who is the Director of Information, Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, this move follows the ongoing investigation of alleged malfeasance in managing the agency and its programs. The statement reads in part, all 4 programs administered by the NSIPA, including Empower Program, Conditional Cash Transfer Program, Government and Enterprise and Empowerment Program, and Homegrown School Feeding Program, have been suspended for 6 weeks in the first instance. Well, after all that's happened, following the suspension of the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Bata Edu, I think this is a fallout from the incident and mismanagement.
As well as the DG of the
NSA. Yes. We've been hearing allegations of mismanagement of funds within the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. Even as we spoke about last week, even the previous minister is also under investigation for her alleged mismanagement of funds under the, I do see a lot of people are saying that we did have Empower, under Jonathan, which people used to support, which people felt was done properly. But I also hear a lot of people calling for scrapping the whole ministry itself. The whole Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, it seems that it has become, it's just a bastion of corruption right now. It seems that the money that's supposed to go to the most vulnerable of Nigerians is not reaching those who actually need it. It feels like the finance is actually hard to track. It's hard to see the impact of the programs that are allegedly being run by the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. So is the ministry itself is it useful? Is it impactful? Is it necessary?
Exactly. Like my mom would say, show necessary. We're talking about, that's all we've been talking about this week, all of, the corruption that is coming to light. And, with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu also, of course, raising significant concerns regarding these operational lapses and improprieties surrounding payments to the program's beneficiaries. I remember towards the end, for most of last year, especially after he came into office, we kept talking about, okay, this feeding program, who are the people that are actually getting, this money? So who are the people that are getting, the rice? Who are the people that are getting the bags of food? Exactly. It had almost become like a situation that was marred in mystery. And then coming into this year, we're seeing the Minister for Humanitarian Affairs, involved in such a huge scandal. Imagine what 585 million naira would be able to do for the poorest of the poor Nigerians. But I agree with you, of course. I believe that this in itself is a very welcome development. And even, what we're probably going to be talking about next, which is, the cutting down of, that 60% / I believe it's a situation where the president is indeed listening and trying his best to make sure that they are starting to cut all of these leakages, so to speak. And when you also mention this humanitarian affairs ministry, the fact that the predecessor and the person who is currently in charge find themselves in this controversy, I think is a good time for the president and his team to look at the ministry as a whole and actually decide if it's something that they want to keep. I believe that it's something that can be handled outside of it, and we'll just continue to watch and see what happens regarding when we look at the suspension of Empower and of course the school feeding program among others.
Correct. I totally share the same sentiments with the two of you ladies. There was no ministry dashing out money before 2020 when former President Buhari, decided to tweak with what was meant to be a function of the vice president, from the office of the vice president. Sadly, it's all ladies that are now at the receiving end, very sadly. All the 3 ladies, the former minister, the suspended minister, and the suspended, Director General of NSIPA. All lovely, beautiful ladies, brilliant in their own right. But hey, we're talking corruption, we're talking mismanagement, we're talking public funds. I think that President Tinubu has done two great things. He has listened to the voice of the people, to the concerns of the people, and I think that it is very much in order to suspend this problematic handout, money dashing program for 6 weeks in the first instance. And I think that will allow the presidency to take a holistic look at what is going on. I wouldn't want the baby thrown out, with the bathwater. But I do not think that we need a whole ministry just to be giving out money. Maybe a bit I do. If she had been put in another ministry, she's a medical doctor, for crying out, maybe she would have done better. But a lot of people will also say that what's our record from Cross River State, especially, in the management of the COVID funds and things like that. So I encourage the president to go the whole hog. If people are found culpable and it can be proven that they have, truly mismanaged funds, not just vying off the established rules, but if people have benefited corruptly, they should be dealt with. But I think that it is important to look at this whole program. I doubt if that budget, there's budgetary allocation, but again, that's this year. If all we achieve is to sanitize the social investment program and make sure that those who truly need the money get it one way or the other, maybe not necessarily through a ministry, maybe an agency that can work. There was a time that JAMB was not remitting a dime to the federal government, but we had somebody brilliant, a very good Professor Ishaq Levy, who turned everything around, and all of a sudden money, JAMB started remitting money to government. So it isn't about individuals. I think it's it isn't about the program. Maybe it's about the individuals that are put in position, and if you get the right people, maybe we can get it right.
I think, I do somewhat disagree. I think the programs themselves, the structure of the programs themselves, are things that in the Nigerian context, it's hard to trace the impact. It's hard to trace the funds. It's hard to know actually if this money is shared. When you have a lot of cash, no matter how the individual at the highest place is, we do want the best individuals in high positions of power, but if you have a lot of cash going around, especially cash, then you're basically inviting corruption to enter the system. I also believe that, we have had this situation where we have a bloated civil service, where we have, in my honest opinion, too many ministries. And so I think as the president is going forward and thinking about certain programs that maybe should be suspended, certain ministers that maybe should be suspended, then he should also think about the Orosaye report, which we all like to bring up. I love bringing it up because
nobody's talking about it anymore.
Oh, I will.
New CEOs and new DGs of agencies have been appointed, and some of the people who in the past, applauded the Orosaye report, once they're appointed now, they've forgotten the fact that, the agency that you are meant to, to pretend over, it was meant to merge with one or two or three other things. It doesn't look like the Tinubu administration is interested in, a tight, but I think we can't be tired of encouraging him.
But definitely not. When you talk about it, I want to hold off until we, talk about the next story. So let's move on very quickly. And in an apparent move to rein in exorbitant travel expenditure, President Bola Tinubu has issued a sweeping directive slashing his future entourage for both domestic and international events by a staggering 60%. This directive applies to all federal MDAs, the Office of the President, the Office of the Vice President, the First Lady, and the wife of the Vice President. State House correspondent Adesua Omoran reports.
It's crunch time, and fostering fiscal responsibility in the corridors of power is the aim of Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu, who has come under mounting scrutiny over the cost of official trips in the last 7 months. A prevalent trend among top government officials in Africa is their penchant for extensive travel with large delegations, despite the strain on their supposedly ailing economies. In the past 7 months, both President Bola Tinubu and Vice President Kashim Shettima have collectively visited 16 countries, defending these trips as vital for driving foreign direct investment into Nigeria. But critics question the economic impact, particularly given the size of the accompanying delegations. Today, Tinubu has announced sweeping financial austerity measures affecting all federal ministries, departments and agencies, the Office of the President, the Office of the Vice President, and that of the First Lady.
4 members of their staff, appointees and the like, will be allowed to travel with a minister on an official trip. For heads of agency, that will be limited to 2 members of staff allowed to travel on an official trip. Furthermore, the numbers that the president has now approved for official travel with him that will apply to his principal staff are as follows. On international trips, the president has directed that no more than 20 individuals be allowed to travel with him. That number will be cut down to 5 in the case of the First Lady. Additionally, the number in the entourage on official international trips for the Vice President will be cut to 5. The number that will be placed as a limit on the wife of the Vice President is also 5.
These cost-cutting measures extend to travels within the country.
In terms of local trips, the President has approved a new limit of 25 members of staff to accompany him on domestic trips within the country. The Office of the First Lady is now limited to 10 staff members to accompany her on official trips within the country. The Vice President will be limited to 15 members of staff on official trips within the country, while his wife will be limited to 10 members of staff on official trips within the country. You will find that the numbers on international trips are less than those allowed on domestic trips. This is because international trips are far more expensive.
And an additional caveat that extensive security delegations accompanying the President and the Vice President during local trips will cease to exist.
When Mr. President or the Vice President travels to any state within the country, the massive bills that accrued due to allowances and ESTA code for security detail coming from Abuja, going and traveling into those states, will be massively cut due to the directive of the President that the security outfits within states, whether it be police, DSS, or branches of the military, will frontline his protective detail when he travels to those states.
This decision follows the controversy surrounding the federal government's contentious 1,411 delegates to the United Nations Annual Climate Summit, COP28, in Dubai about a month ago. It remains to be seen if President Tinubu's actions align with his words and what consequences may await defaulters. Adesua Omorwan, Arise News.
Very interesting times in Nigeria. I mean, first off, I think what I definitely need to say is, kudos to, the president and his team for listening, just coming off the back of COP28, where our delegates number was as close to China, and just looking at was it the same? Oh, yeah, was the same. And for a long time we've been talking about the government, cutting cost of governance, making sure that we are plugging any leakages. And to hear this, I just want to say, kudos to the president again. He's definitely listening. But then again, I think to start to look into the nitty-gritty details of what this 60% slash actually means. Now, of course, the objective is to cut wastage, and when we look at that implementation of that price slash, actually for ESTA code, travel tickets, all of those things that come into the currency or the money that is spent when this huge number of people have to go out with the president or the vice president or whatsoever. When we talk about the advance team, now I believe what it is because there's no exact line item as to the people that are being the people that are being cut off. When we look at the people that actually go out with the president, the advance team, the media team, correspondents from different media houses, the president's medical team, including the chief physician, we're looking at the protocol department. I'm a bit confused as to whether this includes the 20, because by the time you start to look at all of these numbers of people, and if the president is going for maybe a specialized event, maybe something on the economy, or even COP28, for example, and needs to travel with persons that are specialized in those fields to give him, the correct advice that he needs to be able to make certain decisions. Do they fall in that 20, or are we looking at that advanced team being separate, and then we're now having that 20? That's a bit of a blurry area that I'm not too sure about, and I'm hoping that the president's team will be able to answer those questions. Another aspect of that announcement was where we heard Ajuri Ngalale talk about using the security on ground when the president, of course, goes to visit, when he does local visits. We can just throw our minds back to when the president was in Lagos for the Yuletide season, and he went to the mosque, and he had, an almost 20-car convoy.
20? You counted only 20.
And, of course, that in itself raised a lot of questions about, cutting the cost of governance. In this situation, how feasible is that? We already have rising space of insecurity. We've had situations where, security personnel have not necessarily handled themselves in the best way when it comes to protecting the lives and property of the people in their states. So when you now add on, the president, who of course comes with a certain level of increased security presence, how equipped are these security personnel to handle his presence? It's a good thing to put on there, but how feasible is it? And then finally, I would just like to appeal to our governors, because this is focused
to take a cue from
take a cue from the president. We're always looking to the center, but if we're able to replicate this in all the remaining 35 states, imagine how much of a cut or to the cost of governance that would be. Please, governors, let us listen. Look at your leader. I'll follow your leader. I pass the baton to you.
Okay, well, I totally agree with you. You've neatly highlighted, all the key points. First, of course, kudos. If you look at it from the point of view of good optics, kudos to the president. This, of course, is a fallout of the mess that happened in Dubai, the COP28, Item 7, a scandal, if you like. That happened in Dubai. So for those who were quick to give some defense at that time, it shows, of course, that the president realized that it was not a good idea to have bombarded Dubai in the manner that Nigeria did. Having said that, I'm not so sure if all the details that our jury reeled out were necessary, were needed. If the idea is for the president to say that let us cut costs and let us reduce the burdensome huge number in terms of entourage, ESTA code and something, you've made the point that cut across the board, as far as federal agencies and ministries are concerned, cut by 60%. Let those who are concerned work out the details. But when the spokesperson to the president comes out to tell Nigerians that when the president travels locally, he would only use this security and that, you don't need that sort of information. I don't think that was smart. I'm also not very sure the sort of message that the president is communicating when he says that the vice president of the country, a joint ticket holder with him, would only be entitled to 5 individuals to travel with him when he's out of the country. What happens when the vice president is representing the president? Outside of the thing, will he travel with 5 or with 20? And just like you asked, the 20, will that include his media aides, including a jury, who ideally ought to be there, wherever the president is going, and those other people who speak for him? His personal security, his protocol people, protocol, persons, medical persons, they won't be 20. Except you're just trying to play, with what they won't be 20. I mean, this is why you can't wait
they have. The thing is, I understand because we've been asking for specifics from our president. We're like, we don't want just words. We want you to show us exactly, tell us the number, tell us this.
Security matter.
And so they have now done this, but what they have done now is they've put themselves in a box because I can tell you that the average Nigerian on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook is going to be looking at that number and they're going to be counting.
Time he travels.
Every single time the president travels, they're going to count them one by one and put the number on top of their heads. But I think for me, actually, what is most frustrating when I saw that is the office of the vice president, in my honest opinion, has been diminished.
You can't do that to the vice president.
It's been absolutely diminished. And I believe this started, I mean, we've had some tips with Vice President taking it back to Atiku Abubakar and Obasanjo, but we also saw powers constitutionally that were supposed to stay within the vice presidential office taken away from Shibajo, under Buhari, and now we're seeing a vice president who's not being treated like, as you said, a joint ticket holder, but being treated like he's an employee or an appointee of the president, and he's no such thing. He's no such thing.
He's now saying on national, but you can't travel with more than 5 people.
I think for me it is absolutely appalling, and I think I applaud the president and I applaud what he's trying to do, and I applaud reduce the costs. I would always be behind reducing costs, but I do believe that also at the end of the day, even the office of the First Lady is not a constitutional office. It's a functional office, but it's not a constitutional office.
Are you supposed to be funding all those 5 to go with the First Lady, 5 to go with...
And
you have your protocol officer, your DSS, or your assistant, but then they'll have their personal photographer.
Like you said, that is what we will see, and Nigerians, will be watching. But I think that the president, and his team should know that when it comes to cost cutting, there are a whole load of other things to do beyond.
It doesn't end here. This is just the beginning.
This is just you're just barely scratching the surface. There is a whole lot to do. We move on. A controversy is trailing a documentary by the British Broadcasting Corporation on the founder of the Synagogue Church of All Nations, late Temitope Balogun Joshua. Nigerians want security agencies to be in their searchlight on clerics with questionable behaviors. Arise correspondent Friday Oloko filed this report.
The BBC investigation reveals human rights abuses including torture, rape, forced abortion, and enslavement of Nigerian, British, South African, and American nationals who are members of the Synagogue Church of All Nations. The BBC says evidence was meticulously gathered for more than 2 years. At a formal presentation and private screening of the 90-minute documentary titled Disciples, The Cult of TB Joshua, guests from the media, civil society and religious organizations were of the view that although the leader of the church is not alive, the institutions of state should fish out questionable characters who use philanthropy to hide their deeds.
It is not an indictment on the church. It is an indictment on who is accused. And it's quite unfortunate that he is not alive to defend himself. All this would have been very, very good if he is still alive. And when he was alive, what moves were taken to confront him with these issues and get him convicted?
The death of a person does not mean that the issue is dead. There are equally important and many victims who have suffered as a result of the man's atrocity. We have to be bold as African journalists to tell it as it is once it affects people.
The church is a corporate entity. So the fact that the head of the church is dead, it's a committee. They have a board of trustees. So the law can go after the board of trustees. This kind of enormous criminal conduct or acts cannot take place without something happening.
The BBC said the investigation started before the death of TB Joshua on June 5, 2021, in response to why it took long to bring the allegations to public space. Although some critics say the documentary is an attack on Christendom in Nigeria, the BBC disagrees.
The church synagogue probably started even way before I was born. Now this is it. For the generation who we have told this story, who have seen the film,
All right. I mean, even in death, the cleric known as TB Joshua is still very popular and is still very controversial. I've watched the documentary. Personally, for me, aside the allegations from the white ladies there who were once members of the church, and I think the other lady who claimed to be, the daughter of the late TB Joshua, there was nothing new in that documentary that I've not seen or heard. There are many Nigerian journalists in the course of the 1990s and the 2000s who have done quite a lot in trying to expose certain things that they're not comfortable with in the church. I do not think that I'm comfortable with BBC coming out with this documentary after the guy had died, although they claim that they started recording while he was alive. It's not new to me. I think that which is the whole import of this story, when things like this happen and there appears to be sufficient ground, for investigation, I think that should be the direction that we are going to. But a few people who spend decades and many years with him and now coming after he's no more to say that he did it, he did that. Okay, that's just one side of the allegation. What would be important, in my opinion, would be, can the police be involved? For example, there are so many cases that he had, the church, that are still in court, especially the one that, the structure that fell at that time. So if you claim that TB Joshua was so big that it couldn't be touched, but then it was not him as an individual that was on trial as far as the crushed church. It was the church itself and the trustees of the church. And I think that now that is no more, if there's merit in those cases, I think this is the time to push it, not just to sit down in front of camera and make allegations. They may be true, that's their truth, but then it shouldn't end there.
I mean, I always feel like the burden on an alleged victim should not be on the victim themselves. At the end of the day, this is why we have organizations that are supposed to be for the welfare of women and children. This is why we have the government. At the end of the day, the government fundamental role is to preserve the lives, the property, and help us prosper and to take care of us. Like we give to the government. We're in a social contract with the government so that they protect us from both from ourselves and from others. As you said, TB Joshua does have allegations, not just even related to the type of abuse that we saw in the documentary, but with the building collapse, with people dying. I think what this documentary does is shows us as Nigerians that we actually have to be more careful and we have to pay more attention because as we saw just last year, I believe it was in Kenya, we saw a cult leader / pastor who had there were scores of people who had essentially committed mass suicide. People were committing suicide in the name of a leader. When you have personalities that are becoming so all-powerful, even more so than a religion, this is where a government, instead of working with these personalities to garner votes or with these personalities to increase their popularity, they need to step in and do what is unpopular and make sure that they are caretakers for their citizens. And I think that's what this documentary is mostly about.
Yes. I mean, just because we have limited time, I think what's really important, and like you've said, is that an independent investigation is, a probe is there. I don't, that whole thing of, what we do, we don't pay attention to it. I think that's unfair to the victims, people that have come out to say their stories. And very quickly to touch on the point where I've seen on social media where people are saying, what gives BBC the right to come out and put this documentary out there? Just agreeing with you as well, Steve. Even in just kind of reading about everything that has happened regarding this story, I came across a newspaper cover from about, I think, 2001 that the late Kola Olawuyi had put together. And that was the Nigerian media as far back as 2001. That's almost 20 years ago. Had put across, the same accusations. BBC, of course, has a bigger presence, it has the reach and the pull to be able to bring people's attention to it. And now that our attention is on this matter, I'm hoping that an independent investigation is done. And until, that is sorted to a certain regard, we just kind of have to wait and see what happens. But I think that's all we have on the week that was.
Absolutely,
today.
that's all we have on the week that was.